Hello everyone, it is Cameron here back again with another video here about approaching the MCAT cars section. This is a question that I get quite frequently where people are asking for tips on approaching this section. I think it's a section that a lot of people happen to have some trouble with, and so today I'm hoping to provide a bit of insight, at least from my side, on ways to approach the section, the ways that passages are laid out, and other things that might be important. I have an initial slide here on just a general approach, and I think the first thing to acknowledge is that this is a tough section for many. This is one where people's scores will vary quite widely, and there's a lot of talk about whether people are sort of set up for success initially, and then some people are not, and whether you can change your score. I do think it's a score that you can change, but it can take a good amount of work, and people do have different starting points. And nonetheless, this is a section that everybody who takes the MCAT does need to take, and it is a tough section. Personally, I found that my scores fluctuated very widely between 125 and 132, and as I was going throughout my studying, my score got into a higher range. It was generally around 127 to 130, and that made me more comfortable, but it certainly varied more than other sections did, and I think that that can be something scary. And so the second note that I have here is to understand that scores will fluctuate and that they might fluctuate more than some other sections. And a lot of this, I think, is just due to the passages that you're going to approach on test day and how well that you're going to be able to receive those passages. And so understanding that can be important. My third note here is to aim to have consistently good scores. So while you may not be able to aim to have perfect scores every time or a score that's above 130, I think you can aim to have scores that are perfectly respectable, and if you see that your practice scores are within an acceptable range, then that should make you comfortable. And my last note here is about practicing, and I have a little star here about practicing with certain materials. And what I mean by this is the AMC materials, in this case for the cars section, it's really hard to imitate the cars section with other materials from test companies. I haven't really found any companies that are able to properly mimic the AMC's writing of the cars section. They really choose very specific passages, sometimes historical ones, sometimes literary ones, and they have a very specific way that they like to word questions, and even the way that they like to word their answer choices as well. And so I think it's very important as you're approaching test day especially to be using the AMC's official practice materials, because that's really going to be the most indicative of the materials that you're going to be seeing on test day, and it'll help you to get a gauge of what your score is likely going to be. My next slide here is on just general passage structure. I think it's important to have a good outline of what to expect when you're looking at a passage. And in general, you're going to see these three things. You might just see a few of them, but a lot of times you'll see all three. The first is in a passage, they'll lay out the context or some very popular belief. And then at some point, there's going to be a shift in tone into the main argument that writer is making, and it's going to be supported by some evidence as well. And lastly, there's going to be a conclusion that's usually going to mirror a bit of the opening or the context, but it'll be a bit shifted based on the main argument. And the reason that it's very important to realize that this is the way that most passages are structured is because if you don't realize this, then you could easily be tripped up when you're going through the different questions and the answer choices. It's important to recognize that buried within a lot of passages, there's going to be this tone shift. And the reason that I think that the writers like to choose passages like this is because they're really trying to trip up people who are going through very quickly and maybe just glancing over the readings, or who really aren't engaging fully with the passage, and who are going to be tripped up when they go on to the questions, and the questions are specifically querying about some of these subtleties in the main argument. And so it's very important to realize that most passages are going to have this sort of dynamic to them, and it's important to be able to spot it. Lastly, I'd like to touch on a systematic approach. This is the approach that I take. Of course, everybody has different approaches, so if this is helpful to you, then of course feel free to use it. the first thing that I do is I scan the passage, and I scan the passage, but I don't skim the passage. So I don't mean to spend a bunch of time skimming it. I mean mainly to just look and see how many paragraphs there are and see if there's a title, any other information you can glean from looking very quickly. I'm not one of those people who likes to pre-read the questions. I think that that takes a good amount of time, and it can sometimes focus you in areas maybe where you shouldn't be focusing as much, but now you're focusing there because of the ways that the questions were laid out, and you can get tripped up because of that. So I personally don't like to do that. The second step I say is to take a deep breath. So in and out, and approach the passage, forgetting about the previous passage, not thinking about the next one, just focusing in the moment with this one so that you can fully engage with the text. And the next thing I do is I'll usually take whatever marker or pen that they have at the testing center. Of course, don't touch the screen or anything, but I follow along on each line to see where I am in the passage and to really encourage myself to be actively reading and seeing what is going on in the passage. And I found that this was a way that helped me to stay very active throughout these sections. And the last note I have here might seem a bit funny for some, but I think it's a very important step, and it certainly helped me. But I say it's to read with emotion. And what I mean by this is as you're going through each paragraph, think about what the author is saying, and if you're agreeing or not agreeing with the section. This isn't going to be asked about in the questions. They're not asking whether you agree or you disagree. But if you're reading on, for example, if the passage is about abstract art, for example, and somebody's saying that abstract art isn't worth anything, and you don't agree with it, as you're reading through and you're feeling that emotion, then when you go to the questions, you'll be much more oriented about what the author was saying and what sort of really regime that the author was setting up. And that can help you if you run out of time with the questions and you're really quickly reading through the answer choices to choose one that you think is pretty consistent with what that author would choose. And so I think that's a very important step. It's not one that necessarily everybody highlights. And again, it's not one that they're really asking you about in the questions, but it's a good way to really orient yourself, and I think can highlight certain things in the passage and can help you to actively absorb things that the author's writing about too. And so I do hope that these are some helpful tips. Please let me know what questions you have down in the comments below. And until next time, take care. Bye now.